Hello students, for today's lesson we're going to look at gains on trade based on demand and supply model. So our learning objective is explain and analyze the demand and supply model in terms of gain on export and gain on import. Okay, our demand and supply model here, we're going to use this model to show comparative advantage. If you can recall the last lesson, we learned comparative advantage by using opportunity cost model. For today's lesson, we are going to use demand and supply model. So we're going to compare domestic price without trade and the world price of the good. So if a country has comparative advantage, then the domestic price will be below the world price and the country can export the goods. If a country does not have a comparative advantage, that means the domestic price is higher than the world price. So in this case, the country will be an importer of the good. Okay. Before we move on to gain on export and gain on import, I would like to introduce to you consumer surplus and producers surplus concept. Okay. Consumer surplus is a monetary gain obtained by consumers where they are able to purchase a product for a price that is less than the highest price that they would be willing to pay. Producer surplus is they are able to sell at a market price which is higher than the least that they would be willing to sell for. Okay, so both consumer and producers, it may look a bit confusing for you. Let's put it in a supply and demand and see where is consumer surplus and producer surplus. Okay, this is our demand and supply graph. Okay, over here is price. This is quantity. Okay, our supply curve is a upward sloping curve and demand curve is a downward sloping curve. Okay, we learned this in our introduction. Okay, now when supply and demand intersect here, we will have price equilibrium and quantity equilibrium. Okay, now to identify consumer surplus area and producer surplus, okay, you have to look at it. So PE will be a equilibrium price or the market price, right? So just assume this is a market for a book, right? The market price for the book is $10. Okay. For consumer, they will have certain level of ability to purchase, right? So the highest value that they are willing to pay for the book would be $15. So in this case, let's say a consumer is going to buy a book, right? He brings $15, but the market price for the book is only $10 because this is the equilibrium that achieved in the market for that particular book. So the difference is $5, right? So that $5 will be the consumer surplus. So the monetary gain that consumer get because the equilibrium price is lower than the price, the highest price that they are willing to pay for the book. Do you get it? So this area above price equilibrium will be consumer surplus area. Okay, so as for producer surplus, so similar for the same book, for example, the least amount that the producer willing to sell the book, probably about $2, let's say, right? But then the market price for the book is again $10. He was willing to sell for $2, but the market price is $10. So for the producer, he actually gained. He's selling his book for $10 instead of $2, right? So the gain that the producer get will be the area for the producer surplus. Okay, so for you to remember, below the price equilibrium will be producer surplus. Above the price equilibrium will be the consumer surplus. Okay, so remember this. So now let's move on to gain on trade, looking at gains from export. Okay, so we will be having our market demand and supply. Okay, so for example, for this we have for a particular product, let's say for coal. So what we have here is here price and then quantity. We have our supply graph and demand graph. Okay, you can write domestic demand or just you can put demand also fine. Okay, so in this case, if you are looking at gains from export, remember I told you that if the country has comparative advantage, that means if the country can sell the product with cheaper prices compared to other countries, then they will have the advantage to export that particular product. So in this case, if this country has comparative advantage of selling coal, right, so they will be exporting coal. So when they export coal, what happen here is in the world market they will impose a higher price. So the equilibrium price is here PE. When the product, the coal, goes to the world market, the price will increase to P1, because definitely you as an exporter, when you sell, you would like to sell with higher prices in the world market. Okay, so originally this was our PE and this is our QE, equilibrium quantity. Now what happened is, because now we are selling at higher prices of P1. Okay, at P1, okay, look at P1. From P1, this is where it touches your demand. This is your supplier. Okay, this is where it touches your demand. Okay, this is your quantity demanded. And this is where it touches your supply. So this will be your quantity supply. So now what happened? Because price has increased, when price increase, law of demand, okay, remember, recall your law of demand. When price increase, quantity demand will decrease, and when price increase, quantity supply will increase. So this is law of demand and law of supply. So that's what we are applying here. So this will be your quantity demanded and this will be your quantity supply. So the differences with domestic demand and what the supplier is supplying, right? So we are having a surplus here. Okay, this area of surplus is what we will export to the world market. Okay, so this is what we will export to the world market from QD, the differences between QD and QS. Okay, so this is area of export. Let's analyze the surplus. What has happened to the surplus? So if you see, before the trade taken place, this was your area of surplus, right? A, B, let me put it D also here. Okay, so this whole big triangle is your consumer surplus. Now when the price increase, this area will be your new equilibrium for demand. This is where it touches your demand, right? Okay, so this will be your new price. So your consumer surplus now has reduced to the area of A, the small triangle over here. So basically what we are looking at here is consumer surplus has reduced. Okay, what about producer's surplus? Okay, earlier the triangle below your PE is your producer's surplus, right? Now price has increased to P1. So this is where it touches your supply. So now the area of your producer's surplus has increased, right? Let's put an alphabet here for easy. Okay, now it has grown to a bigger triangle. It's covering a bigger area because the price is at P1. So the producer's surplus originally at C and E, this small triangle. After the trade has taken place, producer's surplus has increased to bigger triangle where it covers C, B, D, F and E. Okay, so basically the producer's surplus has increased. Do you get it? Okay, so you get a clear picture here. Just to recap again, okay, equilibrium price, PE, or you just can put P also. PW is the world price. Okay, so when world price increase, quantity supply increases. This Q2 is your quantity supply and Q1 is your quantity demanded. Okay, so the differences between quantity demanded and quantity supply will be your export. Okay, because your domestic demand is Q1 but the supplier is supplying at Q2. I already explained to you why is it so, because when price increase, quantity supply will increase but quantity demanded will reduce. Okay, and the area of A here will be our new consumer surplus due to increase in price. Okay, earlier A, B, C, D and A, B, C is your consumer surplus. Now it has only become to area A. As for producer surplus, earlier was this area D and E. Now it covers a bigger triangle here, B, D, C, E and F, because supplier now can supply for higher prices. So the analysis here, if that was a graph or supply and demand for a wheat, for example, so Australia has a comparative advantage in producing wheat, so they will export wheat. So the wheat export will be between Q1 to Q2. Okay, between Q1 to Q2. And Australia's wheat producers will gain. They will be the winner. But domestic wheat consumer will be loser because now they have to pay higher prices. But producers gain because they are supplying for higher prices. Consumer surplus fall. Okay, so they become losers. Producers surplus increase. I have explained the area to you just now. It increases by which area? So producers will be the winners. Producers gain more than the consumers loss. And the area of export, is this area. Okay, so that will be your total surplus or economic welfare that we gain from export. Okay, so this is how you analyze, okay, in terms of quantity, price, consumer surplus and producer surplus. Okay, moving on for gain from import. Okay, let's have an example. Let's say the product is cars. If the world price of car is lower than the domestic price, then we can import cars. Okay. The graph that we are going to use is same supply and demand graph. We have price of cars, quantity of cars. Okay, this is supply and this is your demand. Okay. Equilibrium is price before trade. Okay, let's say price before trade, you can label it as P or PE, and this will be your QE. So now because you are buying from foreign countries or you're going to import the cars from foreign countries, so definitely you're going to buy with cheaper prices. So price after trade will be P1. When price reduce, what is the outcome is the domestic quantity demanded will increase to Q2 because again we are still using the concept or law of demand. When price decreases, quantity demanded increase. Okay, the other way around for supply, when price decrease, quantity supply decrease, because now the domestic producers has to reduce their prices, right, to be par with the cars that comes from other countries. So they will feel it's not profitable for them, so they will reduce the number of quantity of cars produced. Okay, so the differences is what we import. Okay, because the domestic demand is Q2 but domestic supply is only Q1. Okay, so the differences is what we import. Okay, so area D is what we gain from import. Okay, now let's look at what happens to the surplus. Okay, so as you know, if you want to find the original surplus, we have to look at the initial equilibrium. So area A here will be consumer surplus before trade, but after trade taken place, this is where it touches your demand, right? So this is the price that the consumer is paying. So what happened is the triangle now become bigger. It covers a bigger area, A, B and D. Okay, so consumer surplus has increased. Okay, it increased from A, now it becomes A, B and D. Because what they are willing to pay at highest price and what actually they are paying after the trade price is lower. So they gain in term of consumer surplus. How about producer surplus? Original producer surplus is the triangle below your PE, okay, which is B and C, right? But now after trade, the price has reduced and this is where it touches your supply. Okay, can you see it touches the supply here? So the small triangle here will be your producer surplus. So basically your producer surplus has reduced. So originally it was B and C. Now it has reduced to C. Okay. So how we analyze this is, our import is between Q1 to Q2. Consumer able to pay lower price and consume more. So they are the winners. Another thing is consumer surpluses has increased. As for domestic producers, they are receiving lower price, so they will be producing less. They become the losers and their surplus decrease. Okay, I already write down for you the consumer surplus increase and producer surplus decrease. And your area D, area of our import, will be our net increase in total surplus or economic welfare that we gain from the total activity of import. Okay, so this explains the gain of trade through gain on export and gain on import. Okay, so we have analyzed both gain on export and gain on import using supply and demand graph or supply and demand model.